Hello, everyone. Good evening. Glad to have you joining us here for this month's deep dive for our LiveWell community, which is going to focus on rest. So it's a very important message. What am I saying about rest? It's a very important component of all of our lives that we need more of, being that we all likely experience a lot of busyness and overdoing a lot in our lives. This is going to be an opportunity to look at the effects of that and the need for rest in different areas of our lives. So I'm Erin Hines at Lifeline, and I'll be one of our LiveWell guides tonight, and am accompanied by one of our other LiveWell guides. So if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday. My name's Meg. And yes, I'm actually super excited about this conversation because as we sometimes try to plan our LiveWell topics, we knew we wanted to do something. Well, originally, I think it was like in the sleep arena because sleep is such an important component to how we feel. And, as we began to kind of talk about it, it's easy to find, all the sleep hacks and things like that come in. When we think about being tired, we think naturally of sleep. But when we came across this idea of other types of rest, I don't know, it just really resonated and kind of hit home of the different ways we can be tired, like different dimensions of being tired. So actually, I feel like it's kind of a fun conversation, like a different way to, just view it, just kind of like it was a different way to view movement last month. So I'm super excited.
Yeah. So, the importance of getting into this, I love one of the words that you used was a burnout prevention strategy, that this conversation is really about how to prevent being so depleted and exhausted. And many of us obviously use the word burned out a lot. When the author of Sacred Rest led into the book, she's a physician, and she kind of talked about the lead into her writing this book was finding herself on her floor just in total exhaustion, like, I can't go anymore, I don't have anything left to give. And I think that was her inspiration, and I know that many of us may have found ourselves in that situation where you just are like, I'm out, I'm done, can't anymore. And this is hopefully going to be a way to begin to take more serious, I guess, the importance of rest, and take away some of the negative stigma about rest that some of us may have from being in maybe the family systems we grew up in, or just the culture we grew up in, which is all about productivity. So many of us maybe see rest as a weakness, as something that shouldn't be a priority, that you should just be able to push through. And so really reworking, I guess, how we see rest to increase its value in our lives, because we're going to put more effort into what we value more. And so many of us value our output, and we don't value ourselves and what we need to give back to ourselves in order to do the things that we do. So I really like this kind of looking at this need to shift our beliefs about rest so that it becomes more valuable. I mean, it is a biological necessity. Our cells require rest in order to continue functioning. And being overstressed, overworked really can have a lot of negative effects on our health. So I really, just wanted to share that piece about it. What does that bring up for you, Meg?
Yeah, well, I think I was thinking of this word of like rewrite the relationship. And again, it reminds me of the topic of when we're talking about movement and like how we originally may have the relationship or that perception of movement as like, weight loss or for a specific health reason. And like, we really tried to emphasize the point of Kelly McGonigal of like, it's about the joy of movement and like what it does for us in terms of being able to just the whole LiveWell concept. And I think it's the same for rest, right? So if we have a negative perception of rest, especially in a hustle kind of culture, like you said, like it can be shown as a weakness. Can we rewrite the relationship that we have, or the perception we have about rest, where we may have assumed this position of like, if I rest, then it means that I'm less than, or I'm not capable, or like whatever story we tell ourselves about rest. Or maybe there's a fear about rest. Like if I rest, then I'm not going to be able to keep up, or I'm not going to be able to get ahead, or, so I think it's really being mindful of like, what's my story? What's my relationship with rest? What belief do I hold about it? And then just like the movement, can we really begin to understand though that, well, like how important it is in order for us to be healthy in really all the areas. So yeah, how does it sound to, so like you said, Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith wrote this book called Sacred Rest, and she actually did a TED Talk, and we'll have those resources, of course, for everybody. Was kind of at that burnout stage. She had 2 young kids. She was a doctor, and she was kind of like, she's like, I'm tired. And she was noticing that the patients were coming in and they were like, I'm tired, like I'm exhausted. And she kind of compared it to like if someone were to come into our office and say, like, I'm in pain. Like, well, where? Like, that's helpful, but not helpful enough. Like, where are you in pain? What does the pain feel like? And so she started to really understand like what it like tired or I'm fatigued was such a vague word. And so she really started to explore within herself and with her patients, like what kind of tired, because sometimes it's actually not physical tired. There are other types of being tired. And so I think she had partnered with other doctors and researchers and really tried to understand these are the types of rest really across the board, like in humanity in general. And then was able to kind of dig deeper and help her patients understand, mostly through, like, she created a rest quiz through the questions that she asked to really understand what area are you tired. And then once we can kind of narrow that down, kind of like a root cause, right? If you think of like functional medicine, so then we can put some simple things in place to even address that better, rather than just come in like, I'm tired, well, here's a sleep medicine, or, something like that.
Yes. Yes. And in that, she also, many of us may have experienced this too. She was in her own personal life going to the doctor, trying to understand why she was so tired, and, talked about how many of us may go to the doctor, we feel like something's wrong and all the tests are good, and she's like, so many women particularly experience this exhaustion. Their doctor says they're fine, and then they think they're just weak or something's wrong with them, when really the biology of getting in there, you begin to understand how our body is breaking down when we're depleting it of the restoration that it needs. So yeah, maybe Meg, you could talk some about the questions that you can begin to ask yourselves to think about, like how your rest deficit might look like in your life. I know the rest quiz has a lot, and we'll have that link, and it was very helpful. But just give us a couple ideas of questions to think about asking ourselves.
Yeah. So these actually come from Dr. Smith herself, but some of the questions are like, where is kind of really understanding where your energy is going. So where are you spending a lot of your energy? What kind of fatigue are you? Where is it that you're draining your energy throughout the day? And kind of paying attention, like, are there things in my environment and even my lifestyle that are sort of predisposing me to some sort of deficit? And maybe this will make sense too when we talk about the types, but like, describe your day. Where do you feel energized? Where do you feel depleted? Kind of notice the transitions and the waves that happen throughout the day. How do you feel after certain energy exchanges? So everything we do is like an energy exchange in a sense, like it's a give and take. And I think one of the things that really stood out for me with that kind of question that I would add on to it is that helped me understand my rest deficits are like, what are some of the things I'm resenting? Because I realized that's where I'm putting energy and it's not really benefiting me, even if it's like with people I care about, or if it's something I love, but if I'm starting to resent it, that's a negative output. And are there things that I can do to kind of set some boundaries or help buffer that, or, you know, restore that in some way? So I think paying attention, like, how am I feeling? Like if you're going to work, how am I feeling before? How am I feeling in the middle of the day? How am I feeling at the office? Like when we're thinking of like the physical, the mental, the sensory, all these types of rest, maybe write down some of these questions of like, where are you spending your energy? Who are you spending your energy with? And how are you feeling moving throughout the day? Like I was finding that interesting enough, because I feel like I sleep well most of the time, but I was really tired. And I was kind of like, well, this is why I think this resonates so much, because I'm like, well, I'm tired. Okay, well, what kind of tired, right? That's what she would ask. And being able to then pay more attention to, and I'll unpack my own story more as we go through the types, but like being able to unpack my day and like who I was spending my time with, or the energy I was giving to other people, and the drainage that caused. And there's some just like micro things that I've had to do, even just like on my drive to work or my drive home from work, that has allowed me to create, like, I guess, to pour back into myself, like very simple things.
Yeah.
I do have the rest quiz. I'll put it in the chat for everybody. Of course, it will be in the email that we always send after the deep dives, but the rest quiz was really helpful to me, because it highlighted, I think it's like a 10-minute quiz. It's free. You get your results emailed to you. And I was surprised by how high some of mine were. But as I learned more about them, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense given like the season of life I'm in. So yeah, the rest quiz was very helpful. So I look forward to if anyone wants to play around with it, and hope it's helpful for them.
Yeah, before we jump into the 7 types of rest, one of the things that she said that I thought of as you were talking, she used these words, we often view life as if looking through the window of a speeding car. Rest rather implores you to slow down and fully live. Rest is the scenic route through life, begging you to slow down and fully live. Rest is not simply pushing the pause button on your day. It is not merely taking a break. It is about, in these words I love, replenishing, restoring, renewing, recovering, rebuilding, regenerating, remolding, repairing. Rest begins with the RE prefix. It requires us to go back to a prior state. It's an opportunity to put back in order anything that has shifted out of alignment. So just thinking as we go through these, where have I shifted out of alignment, and what do I need to do to recharge and restore that area? So
yes, 100%. And to add on to that, I think she emphasizes so much, like when we think of rest, like I'll rest when I go on the vacation. I'll rest when I take some things off of my plate. I'll rest if I can multitask, and then I'll have a moment. And I think being able to learn, like we integrate rest into our day, like it becomes part of a lifestyle. And even she admittedly says like there can be resistance when we realize that means we might have to adjust some lifestyle things. But I think even just with my own practice, like it's been very small things. Like it's so small, but it's helping. And so, but I love the idea of like, okay, I even want to reframe the way I view vacation. Like vacation is actually not restful. At least mine are. I don't know, maybe some others are, that I'm totally jealous. But for me, I was like, okay, if I change my relationship with vacation and not look at it as something that's going to be restoring, it's fun sometimes, it's adventurous, I maybe go places that I learn new things about different parts of somewhere or the country, or maybe I have, maybe some of it's restoring, but it's not rest. And I also think then if you view it from that lens, sometimes it takes away even the frustration and the expectation that we put on a vacation when we realize it's not really maybe meant to be restoration in that kind of sense.
Yeah. And I think it really, in terms of that grind work culture that we live in, she used the analogy of, if we're working hard 51 weeks a year and think taking a 1 week vacation is going to replenish us, that's like giving a starving child one bowl of rice and saying, well, that's good enough. I guess you're satiated now and you'll be fine. You won't be hungry anymore. I mean, it's like, no, we need regular, consistent meals to not be hungry, not one bowl of rice or not one vacation. I mean, that's not. So that notion of taking the 10 minutes each day, that resting throughout the day, it is a everyday effort to figure out how we're going to work rest in so that we're not so depleted and counting, like almost clawing for that vacation that is an illusion of rest, which is really not rest. So it's really about that daily awareness and that daily practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. You ready to jump into the 7 types of rest?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so the first one we'll just start with is the one we most often think of, which would be the physical rest, right? And so that's like our physical body. Do we feel it in our body? Are we fatigued? Like if we have physical exhaustion, you're probably gonna maybe have that more inflammation, more pain, like you're gonna feel it more, right? And you might have the trouble sleeping. And I think there's also just that, because we're in that constant, what would you say, like, that's that high achieving, like that performance and the expectations and things like that. So you're going to feel it physically. And she talks about physical rest in 2 ways. So one of it would be like the sleeping, napping, like when you think of actually just letting your body rest. And I think that's what we also go to when we say we're tired. The other piece, though, which I thought was interesting, was sort of more like an active rest, still in the physical sense, but she talks about like being able to move, like resting the lymphatic system in a sense. So it's really more like the stretching and the yoga and any like that gentle kind of movement that provides a physical rest. So sometimes we may feel physically exhausted, and it may be that we need to sleep, or it may be we need something just a little gentle to kind of help clean up the system, so to speak.
Yes, giving everything a chance to rest so cells can regenerate and restore and heal. So absolutely, the physical, I do think that was my number one, in case anyone's not sure about that. That was certainly the one that was going when I took the rest quiz. So but yeah, so those are definitely, I think, the one that catches our attention most, because our body wearing down is not something we can ignore as easily as some of the other types. So yeah, the actions, I know that she talked about the practicing body fluidity, giving stillness a purpose, preparing for sleep, were 3 of the concepts she talked about. So again, with that circulation of the lymphatic in our system, keeping that in balance and being able to be still on purpose and that be okay. The concept of, preparing for sleep. We talked about sleep actually earlier today in our self-care toolkit talk, about the importance of prioritizing sleep and setting ourselves in a good position to get to sleep. I know the post that we had on Instagram this week talked about that rest being the bridge and the gap to get to sleep. Like if you're taking time to rest, you'll be more prepared to sleep rather than getting to sleep time and you're keyed up and wired and burned out and you can't turn it off and slow down and go to bed. It's like resting throughout the day actually will help you have the better sleep that you need, and the importance of preparing to sleep and scheduling your sleep and prioritizing how you're going to stay asleep. And so anyhow, yes, that's certainly an important area.
Yeah, yeah. And I think to make a plug for that, because I think this is the part of the conversation that we could spend a lot of time in, is like, what are ways people prepare? I'd be interested in this maybe in the Q&A of the ways everyone prepares to go to sleep. Like what is your sort of bedtime go-to? I'm a big fan of wearing blue light glasses. Actually, I wear mine most of the day, anytime I'm on the computer, usually, and then in the evening, and lowering the lights. I try to quiet the space down as much as possible, but it'd be just a good conversation, whether it's here, on our media accounts. But anything else about physical that comes to you?
Hey,
Okay.
golf, like you said, we could spend all night on it, but we've got 7 others
I know.
or 6 others.
So the second one is mental rest, which actually was my highest one. Well, I had 5 really shining stars in my rest deficit. So like they all wanted the attention to be number 1, but mental rest was definitely one of them. And part of it is the mental, like our brain is always going, right? And as she was describing, like part of the time is like the mental noise we have in our brain, which is either the racing thoughts or the things we tell ourselves, our feelings, our emotion, which oftentimes is negative, but sometimes the mental rest can be positive too, right? Like it can be things we're listening to, it could be inspiration and motivation, but there's a lot of mental clutter that can just drain us essentially. And I think when you have a mental rest deficit, like it comes out as, well, it can come out as irritation, it can come out as frustration, it can come out as like brain fog or being short with other people, or things like that. And one of the things that I was actually I was kind of surprised that this was one of mine, but I think what I realized is like I'm constantly absorbing a lot. And I'm also someone who is a curious person, and I have a love of learning. That's one of my languages, or like if anybody does the character strengths, that's one of mine. Like I love learning. And so all of the in between pockets of my time, I was always consuming something, because I love learning for my job. I love learning things for my family. I love learning for my own personal mental health and well-being. And so whether it's a podcast or a webinar or a class, or I don't really listen to news, but like I was always consuming, right? Like in the car.
Input.
All the time. And I realized then that I wasn't ever allowing that part of my brain to just be quiet. So not only was I consuming stuff, but I also had my own mental like thoughts and feelings and emotions too. So there was just a lot going on. And so one of the things that I personally have done then is really to limit more of my consumption, which also goes into sensory. We'll talk about it, but when I drive to work and when I'm coming home, I was always trying to catch up and listen to something, like get ahead essentially. And now it's quiet. And I would find myself like, okay, I've got like 3 loads of laundry to fold. So I listen to something. I'm like, I actually I'm not going to. Like, I'm trying to remove that pressure of feeling like I have to consume in order to be of service in some way to myself or to others. And it was tricky at first, because I thought I enjoyed those things. And I think I do enjoy those things. That's why I was always doing it. But it was causing fatigue in a way that I didn't even realize. And I actually am finding that's helping. That's what I'm saying. Like even those small things of like just not consuming all the time in all my little crevices of the day has been helpful in that sense. So that's why I think it's so important to understand where your deficits can be, so then you can find your own ways to replenish, right? Like she would even say, if you're someone who goes to bed and you have all the thoughts because you haven't had space to really process your day, and now we're bombarded by all the things, like just have a place to write it down before you go to bed, right? Like sort of like the dumping of the brain, a journal of some sort. So yeah, the mental rest seemed like we have actually more ideas to talk about if you want to jump in now, but that was a big one for me.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of one day you and I were on a Zoom or something, and you were like, Erin, do you have that many tabs open on your computer? So mental fatigue is like having too many tabs open in our brain. And we know how our computers and our phones work when we have too many tabs open, and we're a big computer and a big phone. So it's like we have to close those tabs out to be able to rest. And so to go to sleep, if you have so much input and you have all these tabs open in your brain and you're thinking about so many things, it's impossible to slow it down, turn it off. So those moments of quiet stillness, not taking in input, are so important for closing down some tabs and not keeping everything open in our mind. So meditation definitely, I think, is the go-to for that for a lot of people. I mean, myself included. I know when there is that regular meditation practice in place, that is an opportunity for getting mental rest. So the quiet of deep breathing also, I think that can come in meditation, kind of just really allows, it's almost like a bringing in new air and letting go of old. And it's just can be really restorative in the mental rest to do those meditation and mindful practices where we're being present in the moment. Just taking in one sensory input thing. Possibly you're on a walk and you're noticing the sounds of nature, those ways that really can help provide some mental rest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love it.
Any other top, I'm trying to look at my notes, see if there was any other types of mental rest we were going to hit. I know one of the things it talked about was that not getting enough rest in that area is where a lot of accidents happen, because we don't have good responses, and thinking about how many wrecks there are on the road with people distracted by the distracted driving of being on your phone and thinking about things, not paying attention to where you're going. Like, a lot more accidents happen when you're not getting that mental rest.
Yeah. I agree. I think being able to it's just that part of the practice of mindfulness too, and just grounding yourself continually in the present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She talked too about the time blocking certain activities. Like if you have certain activities you have to do, emailing, social media, or gaming, or surfing the internet, or catching up on news, like setting a boundary about that, giving yourself that hour or that 30 minutes of limited time for some input, so that you're just not mindlessly engaging in input for hours at a time, which so many people can get caught up in. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next.
Yeah.
All right, let's go. So the third one would be the emotional fatigue. I kind of think about this in two different ways, or I've heard her kind of explain it in two different ways. So she says you feel this type of rest when you don't need to perform or meet external expectations. So we obviously pour out emotionally when we're supporting others. So a friend, a child, a partner, a coworker, in some emotional capacity. And I think then the emotional fatigue happens when that part of us is not replenished. And she also, though, which I think is interesting, explains emotional fatigue as like when we can't fully be ourselves, which I think that's the natural part, right? Like we may hold certain parts of ourselves back in our work environment, or we may hold parts of ourselves back, around our family or friends, or just, I'm not sure that we're always fully authentically ourselves with everyone around, but that can be really draining on us, because it's like, it takes effort to pat some of yourself back, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I think treating emotional fatigue as just us constantly pouring out to others, or like fielding others' emotional energy, and also not being able to fully be ourselves. And it requires energy to hold part of ourselves back.
Yes. she talked about being a physician, having to hold her emotion when she was doing her work. If there's someone in front of you that's upset, not being able to just be as upset as they are. Maybe you're feeling sad, but you're having to hold that in. So I think when we think about all the holding that we do of emotion, and then the cup being too full because you've held so much in without having processed through that. So it's a lot of that absorption, again, without any clearing out of that. And then just like the mental clutter, you're holding too much in your mind, your emotion, you're almost like holding too much in your heart, where you're just have that emotional exhaustion, feeling like you can't absorb anything else. And what we need to do, I guess, in that regard, to protect ourselves better. I know she talked about boundaries a lot in that area, that we have to become able to say no to things that are becoming emotionally exhausting. Maybe that's having better limits with work, or having better limits with relationships that are more highly emotional. So that area is one I'm sure we all experience some exhaustion in.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And to tie that into, because I think they go together, so I think we could probably talk about them both in tangent, is then the social piece, which part of the social piece then is, well, this is another, I feel like, big category, but first I'm going to tie it into the emotional, and then it'll make sense how I separate it out. But the people who can restore sometimes with the emotional rest are the people socially where there are maybe not expectations on us, or we feel like we could be fully ourselves. Now, sometimes like there can be someone who is draining emotionally, and they can also provide social rest. Like it can be both in that sense. So just kind of understanding, like, sometimes my friend emotionally drains me, but sometimes they also provide social rest, and I think that's a natural part of it. But what's been interesting for me as I've kind of played around with this, I had to identify, like, I could even have really dear friends sometimes still may deplete me emotionally a little bit. And figuring out how to navigate that and how to set some boundaries. And then because of that, I've also been more intentional about new relationships that I am trying to create, where I feel like there are maybe not as many, like it feels more like I can just be myself, or there's a little bit fewer expectations. Like it just feels more joyous in a sense. And actually I have found that to be a lot of fun. Like even just recently with a new friendship here, is like, it's someone who just makes me laugh so much, right? And I was like, well, this just feels like, I just feel it's just fun. Like it feels like I don't know, it just feels fun, and I'm allowed to actually feel more like, and I've kind of joked with you and another little guide to Keisha about, sometimes I feel like I hold back because I am a little bit more introverted and quiet, and I tend to be reflective, but I can also feel like gritty and loud, and like have a weird sense of humor that I don't let everybody see, because I'm like, sometimes people don't see that really silly loud side of me. But I'm finding people here in person, because you and I are not in person together, to have that relationship with, and it feels really nice. So I think the social piece is understanding who in your life can you be yourself, and who feels like provides that sense of emotional rest. So I know that's a lot, but that was the piece where it's in alignment with emotional. There's also a whole lot of other social, I don't know if you want to jump in on the rest of the social rest, but that's one piece that she describes.
Yeah, well, being able to have some places, people in your life that don't require anything from you, I think was that key, that we often have so many people who depend on us for so many things. And so it's important to have some areas where there's nothing to give, in that situation, and there's the opportunity to receive. So I think that's the important part. And like you said, it kind of ties them together. We can talk more about the social unrest if you want to get into that one next. But, with the emotional protection, it is about being emotionally aware and being able to recognize what's feeling positive and negative, and how to maximize the positive things that you participate in that bring you positive emotion, and how to reduce the amount of time you spend in those that leave you feeling negative. And she talked a lot in that area about not comparing ourselves to others. That it's easy to get caught up in, is this good enough? That kind of circles around in that people pleasing area, but it's like being able to find your worth. She kind of describes that, stop hustling and for your worthiness. Instead, just know that you are enough as you are, and not based on what you have to offer to anyone. And that risking vulnerability, she talks a lot about in that area, that that's where you come into that, just where can I be my authentic self, where I'm not having to wear any mask, where I can just be accepted as I am and just be. So those are a couple of the things that stood out to me.
Yeah.
So do you want to go ahead and go with social? Because the social unrest, when we're socially fatigued, it's really that loneliness and that feeling detached from relationships that would bring us happiness. So she, if you want to go on that one, and then we'll come back to spiritual.
Yeah, I think, I feel like I said a lot of it already.
Okay. Yeah, we may have.
But a lot of it was the isolation and the loneliness, and thinking about how sometimes we can even be around others, but we feel alone in our experience. So it goes back to, for my own personal experience of thinking about socially, where in my life, like what relationships are depleting me and what are recharging me, or what am I looking for, or how do I, I think just trying to understand how can I be myself in relationships that maybe don't require everything,
Well,
or
and
as
I
much.
think that's really what we're trying to do in our LiveWell community, is to have a place, whether it's going to a yoga class or retreat, where it's like you can just show up as you. And I think that's a place where you can hopefully feel some social rest, is in this community or other communities like this.
Yeah. And one more point on social rest, which for different people, maybe this doesn't resonate, but I at least want to throw it out there. She does talk about online relationships, which is can become problematic, because if we're continually feeling like it's too much, we're striving in that online field more than resting. And we're not wired to bring all these people into our home, essentially. So I think having a mindful relationship, even with what it looks like in the way we engage online, can be very awakening. I think it's just something to be curious about. I really liked the idea where she's like, we're not meant to engage with all these people and bring them into our lives. Like, we're not wired that way. And kind of giving us permission to not feel like we have to be.
Yes. Okay. Spiritual. I'm looking at our time. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Moving along.
We have 3 left. Okay. So spiritual unrest. The way she kind of phrases is like, it's really just our longing for a purpose. That's a very abbreviated version, because a lot of us have different spiritual beliefs and spiritual backgrounds. But if you were to hone it in on one theme, it's like, do I feel like I'm in alignment with a purpose or a higher value or something of that sort, that we are all interconnected? And if I think maybe if we were sort of feeling like a depletion there, it might again also come back to why am I here? Or I feel lonely in this world, something along those lines. So trying to understand, do you feel connected to the greater good? That's a very quick version of it, but I think in a sense that she refers to.
Yeah, I think one of the things is like that, do I matter? Does my existence matter? And I think that's that longing for that connection, that homeness, that I belong. I do have meaning and value to be connected in this greater good. So yes, and that if you're feeling achy in that area, that, maybe you do explore more about what is missing in that area and what is needed in that area. Is that a relationship with nature, with a higher power, with, how do I connect to something greater outside of me to feel connected there? And the, kind of reuniting, bringing in like that mind, body, spirit connection, where it's like, okay, we're thinking about our mind, our heart, we've talked about earlier. This is more of that soul, like, do I have a soul ache, or does my soul know it belongs and I have a purpose that I'm contributing in this world for a reason, just by being, not by what I'm doing, but just that my being matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so the next is sensory rest. Kind of self-explanatory, but if you think of all the things that our nervous system is bombarded daily, right? You just think of all your senses, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you touch, all of these, what you taste even. So we're constantly bombarded, and it's easy for our senses to become overwhelmed. Again, I think this is even more impacted because of the it's so easy and kind of in our face about the consumption with screens. I think this has probably impacted us a lot in terms of our sensory depletion, because we take our screens with us everywhere, and it's really easy to be on them all the time. We kind of feel dependent on them. So I think part of, you might have like physical, like the eye strain, you might, or, even if this was like other sensory, like if you're someone who has young kids at home all the time and, they're climbing all over you or whatever, like you might be like overstimulated, or you might be depleted if you think about like, I don't want to be touched, right? Like there's a deficit there. So I just kind of being mindful, am I at a job where there's a lot of noise, or there's a lot of smells, or, being really mindful of the environment that you're in and your sensory experiences, and how can you then kind of buffer or minimize some of them in some way. So even if you're someone who spends a lot of time on the screen, it may just be closing your eyes for a few minutes to give yourself a break. Like that's a very simple, kind of resolve of like, I can feel my eyes are tired, I'm just going to close my eyes for a couple of minutes and give them a break. Or finding ways to reduce some of the stimulation.
Yes. The talks about unplugging, obviously, getting away from electronics when you can, or at least downgrading your exposure to things. So back to that time blocking, or setting limits to, TV time, or whatever input it is, having some sort of limit there. And once you identify like what your trigger is, really being able to eliminate which things you can. For instance, if you have a lot of noise in the background at work, does it help to have a white noise maker at your desk? If you don't like white noise and there's a white noise maker, sometimes that happens in my office. I hear it so much, I want to turn it off and just have silence. So, really trying to identify what is it that is overstimulating me, and how can I reduce or eliminate my exposure? So,
yeah, love it. Okay, last one is the creative rest. And this one was an interesting one in the sense that, well, let me make sure I have it on this side. Okay. Because when we think of creative rest, I think, well, at least this happened for me, the initial part might be like, well, I'm not really a creative person. Like, this doesn't really resonate. We might think of like people in the arts, you know, they need a creative rest. If you're someone who constantly is creating something, designing something, performing something, it might be like that. But she also alluded creative rest as to problem solving is a creative work. So if you're spending a lot of time coming up with solutions, or if you're problem solving all the time, that is a creative part of your brain that is being used. And so what she had found interesting was, even with the pandemic and so many people ended up having to work from home for a while, you know, we're still going through rest, and they're like, well, I don't like, things are going pretty well. Like, I'm working from home, and like, they thought that was actually would benefit them and that they would feel better. But what she found was people were having to problem solve a lot more because there were things that we were having to figure out because, you know, life was different. We were having to figure out how to do things online and what to do with kids. And, you know, like, we had to use our brains in a different capacity, and that created a deficit in our creative abilities. And so part of the solution to that is actually more of the natural world of being able to just be and kind of experience, you know, nature in the moment, whether it's trees or water or the air or the sun, and just kind of let yourself absorb the natural creativity of the world, I guess, so to
Yeah,
speak.
really, like, yes, the beauty and all that is already there that you didn't have to do anything to create it, you know, sunsets, all those things that are beautiful that we didn't have to create.
Mhm. Right. Yeah.
You talked about that, building in mini sabbaticals into your life. I really like that term of, yeah, how do I take a little retreat each day, even if that's getting up and walking outside for 5 minutes, breathing some fresh air, seeing what, you know, Mother Earth has provided for us that day. I mean, so it's really just kind of taking in any moments of beauty or awe or inspiration that are available for us.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
I
So I
know. Yeah, well, that's the 7 types. I mean, one thing I want to say next, and you'd be thinking, I know there are a couple things you wanted to mention, but she talked just about excuses that we come up with so many excuses not to prioritize rest. And so, you know, whether that's fearing change or, you know, if I slow down, am I gonna, you know, lose my edge? You know, there's so many excuses that we use that we really need to evaluate and just, you know, rewire our brain to see that value, that it's, you know, we need to stop. I think her quote I love was, stop trying to fill every promise with blood, sweat, and tears. It was like, we maybe run away and excuse the need for rest, and we really just have to settle into seeing the benefit of actually enjoying our life and enjoying what's around us. And, you know, she referenced just like the tasting, you know, being able to just really taste the fullness of life. And when we're too busy, we miss that. We miss what's right in front of us, sometimes running to the next thing. So boundaries, sacred rest boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. So she talks about different boundaries kind of on all of these types. And you mentioned one of them, which was the emotional boundaries. So protecting yourself from others and from others' abuse, or from others maybe draining your energy. So what would those boundaries kind of look like, whether it's physical boundaries or just how much time or energy you allow that person to have of you. There's the sensory boundaries, so protecting yourself from the fatigue and stimulation. So maybe there are going to be some boundaries with the phone. You know, that's just the one that comes to my mind. Like, it doesn't come in the bedroom with me at night, or, you know, it's limited on how long I'm going to spend on it for a certain thing. So I think coming up with your own sort of boundaries with sensory, like you said, like maybe turning off noise could be a boundary. There are the physical boundaries, protecting your health. That could look like so much, but maybe it's just think again about consumption, like what do I want to put into my body, or whether it's whatever I drink or whatever I eat. Or physical boundaries could be even again with somebody else, but thinking about your physical health. What are my boundaries in terms of like what I want to claim for my sleep? Do I want to protect my sleep time and how late I'm going to stay up or when I'm going to get up, right? Social boundaries protect you from the perfectionist trap. And again, like valuing that inner circle. Who are my people where I can be myself and I can just let go and find joy and love and rest there, and being able to protect that for ourselves. Sorry, I feel like I'm flying through these, Erin. Mental boundaries protect your priorities. And I think with mental boundaries, oh, I just actually had a thought and it just flew out. So, okay, maybe
Just
you
that
take
unplugging and detaching from all the input, it's saying no to more input.
That's right. That's right. Like when I think of the tangible boundary I set of like, I'm actually not going to consume as much input as I was. And so when I'm driving, it's silent,
Yeah.
which could also, I guess, be the sensory boundary as well. And then the creative boundaries really just help us appreciate, like you said, like our natural surrounding. And maybe a creative boundary, actually, I would think of, actually had a conversation earlier, is we don't always need to jump into the problem solving.
Yeah, letting something be, I mean, I think there must be some unplanned, unstructured time where you can just be. And that pause allows for growth and healing and recovering. And I think it all comes back to human being instead of human doing in a lot of ways. I love the part, and people who know me know I've been talking about blood pressure for the last couple of months, but she really talked about rest being a heart choice, that it's a life and death decision, that every heart needs rest. And so just think about the taxing that we do on ourselves, and that this is a important matter. This isn't like a luxury. This is something that we have to commit to, taking care of our hearts, our bodies, our minds, our souls. They all need our attention. So she talked about making a heart choice by living in the present, living life on purpose, believing in the power of hope, receiving help when needed, adapting to change, forgiving, loving with an open heart, growing in faith, releasing pain of the past, embracing promises of tomorrow, and accepting the gifts of rest. Then that was just a beautiful chapter. So if any of you are interested in reading more, that book does offer lots of lovely tidbits that were very helpful for me. She even said there are times when I need to be reminded of how my choices affect my outcomes and why rest is required to live well. So I was thinking about LiveWell when I saw that.
She was plugging LiveWell.
Yeah. And also that it's not just the Sacred Rest book that we talked about. We'll have other resources. Tricia Hersey, some of you may have heard, she's the founder of the Napping Ministry. She talks a lot about the grind culture, capitalism, how we're too exhausted, how we really need to prioritize rest. So she's got a good book herself out and has been interviewed a lot to talk about this. And I love her message along with this message, because it's really, the note I said is, I love how Tricia says we don't need to rest to be able to grind harder tomorrow. What we need is more softness, more care, more compassion, more community, more collective healing. And that's what I think really inspires me about LiveWell and the community we're trying to build here, is that we support each other and encourage each other to take care of ourselves, to nurture ourselves, to be able to be our authentic self and to know that is enough. And so it's just, she has a beautiful message as well.
Yeah, love it. All right. On that note, we could keep talking. I mean, we almost spent an hour talking about rest.
I know, I'm sorry, guys. We
we'll-
usually try to
maybe
cut
we'll
that
open it up.
to 45 minutes. So we'll open that up. And while I'm stopping this recording and opening up, I don't see any questions